it's Alice, and today I'm gonna talk about the books I read in August. I feel like this month was a pretty standard reading month. I had a very good reading summer, but now things are getting back to normal and I'm sort of back to my reading one book a week type thing, which I still feel is pretty good, so I am quite happy with that. I'm also really happy because some of the books I read this month were just excellent. The first one is one of them, and I absolutely loved this. This is The Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi by Shannon Chakraborty. And this is like historical fiction, fantasy adventure, and in it we follow this pirate queen who comes out of retirement when she is presented with this quest and this reward that is just too good to pass up. This was just so much fun to read. Like, I had such a good time with this book, and it really scratched that adventure book itch that I had, which I'm very happy with. And it's one of the more enjoyable adventure books that I think I've ever read, but I feel like the adventure books that I do like are usually quite enjoyable, and that's why I like them so much. I really loved reading about our main character in here, and I really like that this book follows a woman who's in her 40s, and she, like, when we meet her, she's already had this adventurous life, and she's gone through a lot of different things. And I think it's great that we meet her when she's a little bit older, and this isn't like her first adventure. She's more seasoned, and she's a very interesting character to read about. She's smart and cunning, but she's also kind and caring, and I just loved reading about her. I also really like the style of how the story is told, and I really like the writing. I loved all of the descriptions, and I also really liked all of the side characters. Our main character is sort of gathering together her old crew, and all of those people are also more seasoned adventurers, which I really liked, and it was quite an interesting group of people. And I just feel like this book took us on a real adventure, and there were a lot of twists and turns, and it felt quite high stakes to me. Like, I was never quite sure if everyone was going to be okay, which I kind of like, because sometimes you read these kinds of books and you're not ever really worried about anyone, but I was like very invested in this. I also really liked when this, about like halfway through, it really veers into having a lot of fantastical elements, and I didn't see a lot of that coming. Like, there are some things, but it becomes quite big, and there's a lot of stuff that happens, which I personally really liked, and I loved reading about this additional world and all of this extra stuff that was going on. I thought that was great. Whenever I read books like these, I'm reminded of how much I just love reading when it's like this, because I was just so into this and I was invested and engaged, and I just couldn't get enough of this. Like, I couldn't stop reading it. And it's so fun when books are like this. I think it's why I'm always looking for adventure books, because those are the books where I feel that the most. And I like reading other types of books as well, like darker, heavier books, but with these kinds of books, they just feel really immersive and just so much fun, and you're just reading and you can't even tell the time is like passing, and it's great. I don't really have any complaints about this book, so I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. I just absolutely loved it, and I'm really happy that this is the first book in either a series or a trilogy, so there is going to be more, and I did quite like the setup that this does. This could have been a standalone, but I'm happy that there are going to be more adventures, and I like how it sort of set up the possible adventures that our main character might go on, and I'm just really excited to read the next books, and this was just fantastic. I had such a blast reading this. I had slightly less luck with my second read of the month. It was The Collector's Daughter by Gill. This is historical fiction, and in this book, in the beginning of it, we meet this woman who has just had a stroke, and she is trying to get back on her feet. And she's had several strokes in the past, but this one is quite bad, and she's struggling to sort of get back to where she was, and she's struggling with her memory quite a lot. And it's one of those things where this is quite common, where if you lose your memory or you struggle with your memory, you remember like long ago better than you remember the present. So she's Because of her stroke and also because of some of the stuff that happens in the book, she's brought back to the 1920s when she was quite young, and she was in Egypt, and she was one of the first people to enter this newly discovered tomb of a pharaoh. So I was very excited about this book, and I feel like I was right in being excited because it does sound right up my alley, but unfortunately it didn't quite do it for me. I feel like the back of this is like slightly misleading in a way, because on the back it tells us of this woman who like was an aspiring archaeologist, and she went and found this tomb, and there's all of this like stuff around that, and there's also talk about a curse on the back here. But what the book really is that it's much more about the present day. Like, we spend much more time in the present day when our main character is older, and the book, it doesn't focus on this as much as you would think reading the back. The book is also set up in that way where we're switching between past and present, but it's interesting because it's doing it in a slightly different way, where usually when you have that kind of thing, one chapter will be the present and one chapter will be the past. But in this one, it switches between in the same chapters, so you never get like a full chapter in the past. And like I mentioned, I feel like we spent a lot of time in the present and not as much in the past, which for me was a shame because I was much more interested in the past than the present, which does tend to happen to me with these kinds of books. But I feel like the structure also like threw me off a little bit, and I really felt like we didn't get a lot of, like, you get told that this woman is an aspiring archaeologist, but we don't really see that much of it. I do think though that this is one of those books where there's nothing wrong with it really, it just wasn't what I wanted and it wasn't what I expected. What I thought we were gonna get was this young, sprightly woman in the 1920s who wants to be an archaeologist and is a part of finding this tomb. And that was going to be like a huge part of the story, and we were going to get to read about this curse and all of that. But that's not really what this is. This focuses much more on, like, there is historical stuff, but there is also a lot of talk about the main character and her meeting her husband and their, like, romantic relationship and them coming together, which, to be honest, I just wasn't really that invested in. But I think the reason I wasn't invested was just because it wasn't what I wanted from this book. I also feel like the setup with the curse was just very underwhelming, and it felt completely unnecessary. Like, there's no tension around it really at all. And it does sort of, it gets mentioned and then it gets brought back up towards the end, but at that point it just felt like nothing to me. So I was a little disappointed in that as well, and then the writing didn't really do a whole lot for me, so I just feel like there wasn't that much in this book for me. But again, I maybe just went into it with the wrong expectations and I just wanted something else from this, which isn't really the book's fault. And yeah, it just didn't do for me. I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars, but I do think that for the right reader, this would probably be fine. Second to last, I read The Bombay Prince by Sujata Massey, and this is like a historical fiction cozy mystery, and it's the third book in a series where we follow Bombay's only female lawyer in the 1920s, and in this one the case is about this female student who is murdered on the day that like the British prince comes to visit, and there's a lot of political unrest in the city. I always enjoy the books in the series, and this is no exception. Very enjoyable. Because it is the third book in a series, I'm not going to talk about it too much, but it was lovely. My favorite part of this was probably reading about the main character. I always love following her and seeing her try to navigate through her life, because she has some stuff in her past that she's dealing with, and she's also in a field where women aren't really accepted, so she's trying to navigate just her life and her ambitions, and I love that. I also love reading, like, I love the setting of these books and like the way it comes to life and the time period. I just think it's so well done. I do think out of the 3 books though that the mystery in this one might be my least favorite, which I'm a little bit surprised by because I thought I would be more invested in it. but I wasn't really. And I wonder if it has to do with the pacing of it. Like, it happens and then it feels like there's this pretty big chunk in the middle where it kind of drags a little bit and then it sort of picks up towards the end. But I just wasn't as invested in it and I wasn't as curious about it, which I'm a little bit surprised by. There is a lot of political discussions around the murder and the death though, which I did quite enjoy. Overall though, it was very enjoyable and it does feel like a very solid book, and there are so many things about the series that I love. Like, I just love following the main character. I'm really invested in her for some reason, and whenever I pick up a new book in the series, I'm always excited to see her again. And I love the time period and I love the setting. But I think I've thought a little bit about this after I finished this. I hope that some of the next books, I know that the next book is already out, I hope that there are some more surprises in the next books, because I feel like at this point I wish they would surprise me a little bit more. Like, I don't know what it is, but I did really enjoy this. I will definitely be reading the next book. Hopefully there will be something else in that, but yeah. A solid mystery. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Still really, really like the series. Lastly, I read Opium and Absinthe by Lydia Kuang. This is a historical fiction mystery novel, and it's set in New York in 1899, and we meet this woman whose sister has just been murdered, and she has been found with her body drained of blood and with 2 puncture wounds in her neck. This is happening at the same time that Dracula by Bram Stoker has just been published, which puts people's imaginations aflame, and our main character is desperate to find out what really happened to her sister, and she just wants the truth. If she can find it through her new addiction to opium. I have had this book for a while and I'm really glad that I finally read it, and I feel like I picked it up at the perfect time, because this feels like the perfect book to read in that like transition between summer and fall. And I really, really enjoyed it. It was just perfect to read right now, because there's like talk of vampires, there's this historical setting, and there's all of this sketchy stuff going on. And we have a main character who is just struggling her way through her sister's death and the mystery around it. I don't really know what I expected of this, but I feel like I had lower expectations than I really should have. And because of that, I was a little bit surprised when this just instantly had me engaged when I started reading it. I think the setup of this is really good. I think the setup of like the vampire in this time is really great, and all of the Dracula stuff. And I think that we're following a main character that is very interesting to follow, because yes, she's struggling with the death of her sister, but she's also struggling with the confines of her life. She wants more, she wants to write and work, and she's meeting these different people who are pulling her in different directions, and then she's trying to navigate all of this while also being an addict. I also really, really liked the setting of the story and the historical time period, and there were just a lot of things that I really liked about this. There are a couple of things that didn't quite do it for me. I do think, like in hindsight, I didn't really think of this when I was reading it, which I guess is a good thing because I was very invested. But when I think about it now, I do think some of the side characters are a little bit one-dimensional. And I do think that it is a little bit of a slower book, I will say, which I quite enjoy because I like reading more about characters and having them established and all of that. So it is a little bit slower. And I really like that, but I do think it drags a little bit in the middle. And there are some things where I'm just like, I just wanted to know more and like get on with it. When we did get to the end though, I was very surprised by what was going on. So that was a lot of fun. I just think this is a very solid historical fiction mystery, and I do really like reading these kinds of books, so I really should do it more. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Really, really enjoyed it, and I really want to read more of this author's work now because I very much enjoyed the time period and just the characters and the writing, and I think that she writes a lot of historical fiction books, so I should definitely read more. Those were all the books that I read this past month though, and now that we're leaving August behind, it's time to do like full-on autumn reading, which I'm super excited about. I would love to hear what you all have been reading lately though, and also if you've read any of the books that I mentioned, I would love to hear your thoughts on them. As always, thank you very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you soon. Bye!